At 8:17 p.m. on December 23, my phone buzzed while I was wrapping the last present I'd bought for my parents. I smiled when I saw my mother's name. The smile lasted exactly long enough to read the message. Skip Christmas this year. We want peace. 11 words. No explanation. No love you. No promise to celebrate another day. Just a decision that had already been made without me. I read it twice before setting the roll of wrapping paper on the table. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the tape pulling loose from the dispenser. Outside, someone across the street had already switched on their Christmas lights. They blinked in slow, cheerful patterns that felt strangely disconnected from the room I was standing in. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was recognition. This wasn't really about one text message. It was simply the first time my parents had put 12 years of quiet expectations into writing. I picked up my phone again and typed one word. Perfect. I pressed send less than 18 seconds after reading their message. Almost immediately, the typing bubble appeared. Then it disappeared. A minute later, my father called. I watched the screen until it stopped ringing. He called again. I let that one go too. For once, I wasn't trying to repair the mood before Christmas morning. I wasn't negotiating seating arrangements, smoothing over arguments, or convincing everyone that another uncomfortable holiday was better than no holiday at all. I simply put my phone face down and finished wrapping the gifts that no one would open. My parents believed they had canceled my Christmas. They didn't realize they had canceled the one person who had quietly kept it together. For the first time in 12 years, I decided not to fix Christmas. For as long as I could remember, Christmas happened because I made sure it did. No one ever asked me outright. It simply became my role. I booked the grocery pickup, planned the meals, wrapped gifts that weren't even mine, and drove the 6 hours to the lake with my car packed so tightly I could barely see out the rear window. If someone forgot dessert, I bought it. If an argument started over dinner, I changed the subject before it grew into something bigger. By the end of each holiday, everyone talked about what a wonderful Christmas we'd had. Very few people noticed who had built it. Over 3 holidays alone, I'd spent $2,840 of my own money without keeping score. Decorations that needed replacing, food for 14 guests, last-minute gifts when someone forgot a present. I never mentioned the cost because I wanted the memories to matter more than the receipts. Ryan always arrived late, usually with a grin, an apology, and empty hands. My parents laughed it off every year. "That's just Ryan," my father would say, as though responsibility and personality were somehow the same thing. Then everyone would thank him for carving the turkey while I quietly washed the mixing bowls in the kitchen. Grandma Grace noticed. She rarely interrupted family conversations, but she had a habit of watching the people nobody else was watching. One Christmas, while I was sorting receipts into an envelope before throwing them away, she reached over and stopped me. "Keep those," she said softly. I looked at her, confused. "They're only grocery receipts." "I know," she replied with a small smile. "Keep every one of them." By the time I left the cabin that year, I had 37 receipts tucked neatly into a file folder. At the time, I thought I was humoring my grandmother. The last receipt she asked me to keep seemed strangely important. The text from my mother stayed at the top of my phone all evening. I looked at it one last time before setting the device on the kitchen counter. "Skip Christmas this year. We want peace." There wasn't a single accusation in those 11 words, but I understood what they meant. Ryan and his new girlfriend had argued with me during Thanksgiving over something so small I could barely remember how it had started. By the end of the night, my parents had decided the easiest way to avoid another uncomfortable holiday was to remove the person they expected would quietly accept it. Me. For years, I would have pushed back. I would have called my mother, tried to smooth things over, and convinced everyone that family mattered more than hurt feelings. That night, I didn't. I typed one word. Perfect. I pressed send 18 seconds after reading her message. Within moments, my father's name lit up my screen. I watched it ring until it stopped. A minute later, he called again. I let that one go too. There was nothing left to negotiate. They had made their decision, and for the first time, I respected it enough not to argue. Instead, I cleared the wrapping paper off the table, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window while snow drifted across the parking lot. It wasn't sadness I felt. It was stillness. When the clock reached 9:04 p.m., I picked up my phone again, not to call my parents, but to search for a number I hadn't used in years. Daniel Brooks, the family attorney. He answered before the second ring. "Claire," he said calmly. "I was wondering when you'd call." I didn't ask how he knew. Something in his voice told me he'd been expecting this conversation for much longer than I had. Daniel Brooks. His voice hadn't changed since the last time I'd spoken to him after Grandma Grace's birthday. "It's Claire," I said. "I know," he replied gently. "I'm glad you called." For the next 19 minutes, I sat at my kitchen table while he spoke with the same careful patience I remembered from years earlier. He never rushed a sentence, and he never answered a question I hadn't asked. When I explained the text from my parents, he didn't sound surprised. Instead, he asked one question. "Are they still planning to spend Christmas at the lake?" "Yes," I said. "As far as I know." There was a pause. "Then it's time you understand something your grandmother asked me to keep confidential." I leaned back in my chair without saying a word. Daniel reminded me that 5 years earlier, Grandma had signed several legal documents in his office. I remembered driving her there, waiting in the reception area, and thinking it was just another appointment about her estate. It hadn't been. He gave me the county recording number and told me the paperwork had been properly filed the same week. Everything had been completed legally, quietly, and exactly the way Grace had instructed. "So, what do I need to do?" I asked. His answer came without hesitation. "Nothing." I frowned. "Nothing?" "That's right. You don't need anyone's permission. You don't need anyone's approval. The documents already exist." The words settled over me more heavily than I expected. For years, I'd believed keeping the peace meant fixing every problem before it reached everyone else. Grandma had apparently believed something different. Before we ended the call, Daniel asked one final question. "They've already made their Christmas plans, haven't they?" "Yes," he sighed softly. "The reservation," he said, "wasn't actually theirs to keep." Christmas morning arrived cold and clear. At 10:12 a.m., I was making coffee in my apartment when my phone buzzed. It was Olivia. "You need to answer," she said the moment I picked up. "Linda just called me." Linda Morales had lived near the lake for nearly 20 years. She knew my family well enough to recognize every car that pulled into the driveway. "What happened?" I asked. Olivia took a breath. "Your parents got there about 15 minutes ago." I didn't interrupt. "They tried the front door. The key didn't work." I closed my eyes. According to Linda, my father tried it again before walking around the cabin, checking every entrance as though another door might somehow produce a different result. My mother stood on the porch, confused. Ryan kept asking whether someone had made a mistake. No one had. A new lock had been installed days earlier. Even Linda noticed the small serial number still attached to the cylinder, untouched since it came out of the box. Then my father opened the mailbox. Inside was a large envelope addressed to Martin and Elaine Donovan. Daniel Brooks stepped out of the neighboring property before they had finished reading the first page. Linda and another nearby homeowner remained close enough to witness what happened without intruding. 3 witnesses in all. "I was asked to deliver these personally," Daniel said. "No raised voices. No accusations. Just official documents." Ryan looked from the envelope to Daniel, then back at the cabin as though trying to understand why everything suddenly felt unfamiliar. My father unfolded the papers with hands that no longer looked quite as certain. Then Daniel reached into his briefcase and removed one final document. He unfolded the deed. Daniel held the deed with both hands, giving my parents enough time to read the heading before he spoke. "This property was transferred 5 years ago," he said evenly. "The deed was properly recorded with the county, and ownership has not changed since." My father looked up immediately. "Transferred to who?" "Claire Donovan." No one answered for several seconds. My mother took the document from him and read it herself, as though seeing the same words twice might somehow change them. Daniel continued before either of them could argue. "Grace Donovan instructed me to explain the reason only if it became necessary." He opened another folder. Inside were copies of tax payments, insurance renewals, and maintenance records. "Over the last 5 years," he said, "Claire paid the property taxes, the annual insurance premiums, and the maintenance expenses totaling $8,460. My father frowned. "I didn't know any of this." "I believe that was intentional." Daniel replied. Then he placed another stack of papers on the hood of his car. 37 receipts. The same ones Grandma had asked me to keep. Grace wanted a record of who consistently cared for the property, he explained. She believed responsibility should matter more than assumption. Ryan lowered his head. I thought Mom and Dad handled all of that. They didn't, Daniel said quietly. Ryan walked a few steps away before turning back. I should have paid more attention, he said. I'm sorry, Claire. Daniel simply gathered the papers and returned them to his briefcase. The facts were complete. They didn't need embellishment. My parents weren't defeated by an argument. They were confronted by years of quiet evidence they had never thought to notice. The hardest decision wasn't whether to let them inside. I drove to the lake later that afternoon. Not because I wanted to prove a point and not because I wanted anyone waiting there to apologize. I went because Grandma had loved Christmas at the cabin, and I wasn't willing to let that memory disappear beneath everything else. When I arrived, Daniel was already leaving. He smiled, wished me a Merry Christmas, and handed me the keys without another word. My parents and Ryan were waiting near their cars. No one raised their voice. I made reservations at Miller's Grill in town. I said, if you'd still like Christmas lunch, you're welcome to join me. My father looked surprised. I thought. He stopped himself. So did I answered. The restaurant was quiet. We shared a meal that wasn't comfortable, but it was honest. For the first time in years, no one expected me to smooth over awkward silences or pretend everything was fine. Halfway through lunch, my mother finally spoke. I kept telling myself excluding you would make things easier, she said softly. It didn't. I nodded. I know. A few minutes later, my father set his fork down. Peace wasn't missing because of you, he admitted. We just kept asking the wrong person to carry it. It wasn't a dramatic apology. It was enough to begin with. When lunch ended, we went our separate ways without promises we weren't ready to make. Before driving home, I stopped at the cabin one last time. The sun was already dropping behind the trees. At 4:41 p.m., I walked alone to dock number 7 with Grandma's small handmade Christmas ornament in my coat pocket. I hung it on the little cedar branch she used to decorate every December. The lake was completely still, and for the first Christmas in years, so was I.